Craigslist is supposed to be a place for simple things, buying furniture, finding a roommate, maybe even picking up a secondhand car. But hidden between the harmless posts are stories that prove the internet isn't always what it seems. Most of us think we're careful online. We double-check listings, avoid anything suspicious, and tell ourselves, that would never happen to me. But the truth is, even the most normal ad can turn into something terrifying. Tonight, I'll share 3 true Craigslist horror stories that really happened. They read not just creepy tales, they read first-hand experiences from people who thought they were making simple deals, only to end up in situations they'll never forget. So if you've ever browsed Craigslist or thought about meeting a stranger from the internet, these stories might make you think twice before answering that next ad. Let's start with the first one, a meeting that seemed like a harmless sale, until things went horribly wrong. The first story starts with a simple ad, a laptop listed for half the usual price. The description sounded normal, the photos looked real, and the seller claimed they needed quick cash before moving out of state. The buyer, a college student, thought he'd scored a steal. He messaged the seller, who responded quickly and suggested they meet in person. The catch: the meeting spot wasn't a coffee shop or a busy store, was the seller's apartment. At first, that didn't seem too strange. People sell from home all the time, but the closer the day came, the more uneasy he felt. The seller's messages were short, vague, and always ended with cash only, no questions. On the day of the meeting, he brought a friend along just in case. They pulled up to a rundown building on the edge of town. The stairwell light flickered overhead, and the hallway smelled faintly of mold. They knocked on the door, and it opened almost instantly, as if the seller had been waiting right behind it. A tall man stood there, expressionless, and motioned them inside without a word. The living room was nearly empty, no furniture, except a single folding chair and a small table with a laptop on it. The windows were covered with blankets instead of curtains, keeping the room unnervingly dark. The student asked if he could test the laptop. The man shrugged and nodded. As soon as he powered it on, the screen worked. But the system was completely wiped, no programs, no files, nothing. Something felt off. He thanked the seller but said he wanted to think about it. That's when the man's demeanor changed. He stepped between them and the door, blocking the exit. "He said you were buying," the man muttered, his voice low and flat. His hand rested against the door frame like he was making sure they couldn't leave without his say. The friend spoke up, insisting they'd come back with cash after checking the specs. The seller stared for a long moment, then finally stepped aside. "Fine, but don't waste my time." They didn't wait. The second they were out of the apartment, they bolted down the hallway and didn't stop until they reached the car. The door slammed shut behind them, but no footsteps followed. On the drive home, they realized the laptop hadn't even been plugged in. There was no way it could have powered on after sitting in a dark, empty room like that. Later, when the student checked the listing again, it was gone. Not marked as sold, completely deleted, as if it had never existed. They reported the encounter to Craigslist and local police, just in case. But without proof of a crime, nothing could be done. The man's name, number, and ad had all vanished overnight. Some people believe it was just a shady seller hoping to pressure someone into handing over cash. Others think it could have been worse, that the laptop was just bait for something far more dangerous. What makes the story creepier is that a few weeks later, another student reported a nearly identical situation with a different item for sale. Same vague replies, same address, same empty apartment, but this time, the buyer didn't bring a friend. When police later checked the building, the apartment was abandoned, no trace of anyone living there. The blankets over the windows were gone, too. No one knows what the seller was really planning, but it's clear the laptop wasn't the real danger. The danger was the setup, the perfect trap for anyone too eager to score a bargain. When I first heard this story, I thought it sounded like something from a horror movie. But the more I looked into it, the more I realized it happens more often than people think. Craigslist is full of stories where the product is just bait. The real goal is to lure someone into the wrong place at the wrong time. And that's what makes this story so chilling. Imagine being trapped in that apartment. Door blocked, no backup, no easy way out. That's exactly why this story still gets passed around as a warning. The student admits he's never used Craigslist again. He sticks to safer marketplaces now, where transactions happen in public and there's at least some form of accountability. And honestly, I can't blame him, because no good deal is worth gambling with your safety. Some people say it was just an aggressive seller with bad social skills. But to me, the empty apartment, the 2 quick replies, the deleted listing, it all feels like more than that. Even if nothing happened that night, the potential was there. And sometimes, the scariest part of a horror story isn't what actually happened, it's what could have happened if one choice had gone differently. That was the first story. Creepy enough on its own, right? But the next one takes things even further. Because while this was unsettling, the second story involves something even darker. This one doesn't just flirt with danger, it walks straight into it. And it shows how quickly a normal Craigslist deal can spiral out of control. If you've ever thought about buying something cheap online, this next story might make you think twice. Because sometimes, it's not the item that's dangerous, it's the person on the other side of the screen, and that's exactly what happens in story number 2. The second story comes from a girl who was searching Craigslist for a cheap room to rent. She had just started her first job in a new city, and finding affordable housing was harder than she expected. One ad stood out. A spacious room in a 2-bedroom apartment, low rent, utilities included, the photos looked clean, the neighborhood was decent, and the supposed roommate seemed friendly through email. They arranged to meet in person. The girl expected a quick tour, maybe a handshake. But when she arrived, the building looked older than the photos suggested, and the hallway smelled faintly of cigarette smoke and mildew. The man who opened the door was much older than she imagined. He greeted her with a wide smile, but his eyes never seemed to match the warmth in his voice. Still, she stepped inside, not wanting to be rude. The apartment was nearly empty. Aside from a mattress on the floor and a single chair, there was no furniture. The spacious room from the ad was just a bare corner with peeling wallpaper. When she asked about the missing furniture, he laughed awkwardly and said his last roommate took everything when they left. Something about the way he said it made her uneasy. He insisted she sit down and chat about the rental terms. She chose to stand, pretending she was in a rush. That's when she noticed several locks on the inside of the front door, all of them unlatched. Trying to stay polite, she asked about the rent again. Instead of answering, he asked personal questions. Was she single? Did she work late? Did anyone know she was visiting the apartment today? Her stomach dropped. She forced a laugh and said her brother was waiting downstairs. It wasn't true, but it was the first excuse that came to mind. The man's smile faded, and he muttered, "That's a shame. I was hoping it would just be us here." Then he stood up, slowly, like he was deciding what to do next. She backed toward the door, fumbling for the knob. Thankfully, the locks were old and loose, and she managed to pull it open quickly. She stepped into the hallway just as he said, "Think carefully before saying no." She didn't look back. She sprinted to her car and drove off, hands shaking. Once she was safe, she checked her phone and saw 2 missed calls from an unknown number. She hadn't given him her number. Later, when she told her coworkers about the experience, one of them pulled up Craigslist out of curiosity. The ad was gone, just like it had never existed. A few weeks later, another nearly identical listing appeared, different photos, different neighborhood, but the same phone number hidden in the email link. She contacted the police, but without proof of a crime, there wasn't much they could do. They warned her to stick to verified rental sites instead of Craigslist. What makes this story so disturbing is how believable the ad looked. The photos, the price, even the neighborhood, nothing seemed off until she stepped inside that apartment. And if she hadn't trusted her instincts, if she hadn't made that excuse about her brother, the outcome could have been very different. Some say the man was just lonely, awkward, maybe socially off, but the empty apartment, the invasive questions, the disappearing AD, it all points to something darker. Imagine being locked inside with someone who made sure no one knew you were there. That's the reality she narrowly escaped. When she tells the story now, she admits she doesn't care if people think she overreacted, because the way she sees it, overreacting saved her life. And honestly, after hearing her story, I think she's right. Sometimes the creepiest monsters aren't ghosts or demons, they're ordinary people hiding behind friendly ads. Craigslist can be a helpful tool, sure, but it can also be the perfect mask for someone with bad intentions. That's what makes this story stick with me. It's a reminder that even the most harmless-sounding posts can be bait. The girl eventually found a real apartment through a verified site, but to this day, she avoids Craigslist completely. And who can blame her? When trust is broken in a place that's supposed to be safe, it's hard to look at it the same way again. That was the second story. Creepy enough, right? But the third story is even worse because it starts with something as innocent as selling an old piece of furniture. This one doesn't take place in an empty apartment or a shady rental. It happens in broad daylight, inside someone's own home. And honestly, it's the kind of story that makes you realize danger doesn't care what time of day it is. Because sometimes, letting a stranger in for just a quick pickup can turn into the scariest mistake you ever make. Let's move on to story number 3. The third story comes from a young couple trying to sell an old couch on Craigslist. It was in decent shape, and they figured it would be easier to have someone pick it up than move it themselves. They posted photos, set a fair price, and within an hour, a buyer messaged. He sounded polite, eager, and said he could come by that same evening. Perfect timing, or so they thought. When the man arrived, he seemed normal enough, mid-40s. Quiet, a little awkward. He looked at the couch, nodded, and handed over cash without haggling. But then he said something that made them uneasy. He asked, "Do you live here alone?" The couple froze, then laughed nervously, pretending not to hear the question. He repeated it again, this time with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. They brushed it off, helped him carry the couch to his truck, and watched as he drove away. But less than an hour later, there was a knock at their door. When they looked through the peephole, the same man was standing there, empty-handed, no couch in sight. He claimed he'd forgotten something inside. The couple refused to open the door, saying firmly that nothing was left behind. The man lingered, shifting his weight from foot to foot, before finally walking back to his truck and driving off. Relieved, they locked every door and window. But the night was far from over. Around 2 a.m., the sound of footsteps echoed on their porch. The husband grabbed his phone and peeked through the blinds. There was no truck this time, just the man, standing in their yard, staring up at the house. They called the police immediately. By the time officers arrived, the man was gone. No footprints, no car, just silence outside. The police told them to be cautious and suggested future meetups take place in public areas, never at their home. But the story didn't end there. A week later, another Craigslist seller in a nearby neighborhood reported a nearly identical experience selling furniture to a man who returned later, asking strange questions. When the couple checked their listing messages, they realized the man had contacted several other sellers in the area using the same name and number. Craigslist eventually banned his account, but by then, he had already made multiple pickups. Nobody knows what his true intentions were, but everyone agreed it wasn't about the furniture. Some believed he was scoping out houses, testing whether people lived alone, and planning something worse. The couple was lucky they never opened the door that second time. The wife admitted that to this day, she gets nervous when anyone knocks unexpectedly. Even delivery drivers make her heart race until she sees a uniform. It's unsettling how quickly something as harmless as selling a couch can turn into a real nightmare. The part that stuck with me most is how normal he seemed at first. No red flags, no obvious signs, just a buyer with cash, looking for furniture. And maybe that's the scariest part. You never really know who's behind the screen when you agree to meet a stranger. The couple stopped using Craigslist after that. They stick to donation centers or trusted apps now. Anything that doesn't involve strangers showing up at their front door. Looking back, they realized they ignored their instincts. That one question, "Do you live here alone?" should have been enough to end the deal right there. But in the moment, it's easy to laugh things off, to convince yourself you're just being paranoid. And that's exactly what predators count on. The couch wasn't the real transaction, it was the access. That's what makes this story feel less like a sale and more like a setup. Every time they tell the story now, friends shake their heads and say, "You got lucky," and honestly, they know it's true. Craigslist can be a helpful tool, but it also hides risks that most people never think about until it's too late. That was the third story. 3 different situations, 3 very different outcomes, but all of them with the same lesson. Trust your instincts when dealing with strangers, because whether it's buying, renting, or selling, no deal is worth risking your safety. And sometimes, the scariest stories aren't tea about ghosts or the paranormal, they're about real people with real intentions. It's easy to think, that'll never happen to me. But so did the people in these stories, right before things went wrong, and that's why these Craigslist horror stories are still told today. Because they remind us how quickly normal can turn into dangerous. And that wraps up these 3 true Craigslist horror stories. Each one different: a shady laptop sale, a disturbing roommate ad, and a furniture pickup gone wrong, but all of them showing just how dangerous online deals can really be. What makes them so chilling is how normal they seemed at first. A good price, a friendly reply, a simple meet. But behind the screen, you never know who you're actually dealing with. Craigslist might have been created for convenience, but these stories are a reminder. Trust your instincts, meet in public places, and never ignore the red flags. Safety always comes before a good deal. So what do you think? Were these just coincidences and bad luck, or proof that sometimes people use the internet for far darker purposes? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear what you believe. And if you enjoyed these stories, don't forget to like the video, subscribe for more creepy true tales every week, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching. And remember, the scariest monsters don't always hide in the dark sometimes. They're just one click away.